So, um, imagine walking into a room, right? You get a standing ovation, everyone is cheering, and you feel absolutely nothing.
No dopamine hit at all,
Exactly. No dopamine, no joy, no rush of validation. It is just neutral data entering your brain.
which sounds pretty wild to most people.
Right. Well, today on the deep dive, we're taking a single, incredibly insightful source from Coping and Healing Counseling, CHC for short, and we are going to completely unpack a highly misunderstood mental health condition. We're looking at schizoid personality disorder.
Yeah, and if you are listening to this right now, there's a really good chance you know someone, or maybe you are someone, who has been completely misread by the people around them.
Okay, let's unpack this because people throw around terms like introverted or, loner all the time without actually understanding the clinical realities of true profound detachment.
Yeah, and what we're going to explore today isn't just about defining a disorder from a clinical perspective. It's about, well, fundamentally rethinking how we view solitude,
Right.
like how we define human connection and what it actually means to need therapy in the first place. The way society treats people who genuinely prefer to be alone is, it's heavily biased,
Well, completely.
and it's often based on a complete misunderstanding of their internal world and their neurological reward systems.
So before we could even begin to understand how to support someone with this condition or, how a clinic like CHC approaches it, we first need to understand what schizoid personality disorder or SCPD actually looks like in everyday life.
Right, the baseline presentation.
Yeah. The source material points out that it's a long-standing pattern of detachment from relationships. And we're not talking about like skipping parties because you had a long week at work.
No, no, it's much deeper than that.
It comes with limited emotional expression, a clinical presentation of emotional flatness.
Yeah, that emotional flatness is a major hallmark of the condition. Clinically, it's referred to as having a restricted range of affect.
Restricted range of affect. So what does that actually look like if I'm talking to someone?
If you are interacting with someone with SCPD, you might notice they rarely show strong emotions externally.
Like no big reactions.
Exactly. Not intense anger, not extreme joy. They present as very even-keeled, sometimes to the point of seeming cold or aloof to outside observers.
Wow.
And alongside that presentation, there is a profound baseline preference for absolute solitude.
Profound is really the only word for it. The source notes there is little to no interest in close friendships, romance, or even sex.
Right.
It is a genuine preference to exist entirely independently. And I was trying to conceptualize how this actually operates in the brain, right?
Mm.
Instead of viewing it as a psychological wall they built to keep people out, it seems more like their interpersonal reward circuitry is simply powered down.
That's a great way to look at it.
Like it sounds like their social appetite is just set to zero. It's not that the interpersonal food tastes bad or makes them sick. They just aren't hungry for it.
Yes, that analogy is perfect. That distinction regarding the reward circuitry is vital. If your brain doesn't reward you for socializing, then sitting at a massive social banquet isn't a joy.
It's just exhausting.
Exactly. It's just an exhausting logistical exercise with no payoff whatsoever. What's fascinating here is the specific detail the source mentions regarding their reaction to outside opinions.
Oh, right. The praise and criticism thing.
Yeah, a defining trait of SCPD is a genuine indifference to whether others praise or criticize them. Think about how completely counter to typical human psychology that is.
I mean, if someone compliments my shirt, I get hit of dopamine.
Of course.
And if someone criticizes my work, my cortisol spikes and I feel a pang of anxiety. Most of human society is built entirely on caring about that feedback loop.
Going back to our evolutionary roots, approval meant staying in the safety of the tribe.
Right, you get to survive.
And criticism meant you might be cast out to fend for yourself against predators. So our brains are hardwired to process social feedback as a matter of life and death.
But for someone with SCPD,
For someone with SCPD, that specific feedback loop is functionally disconnected. They are not secretly craving your approval and defensively pretending not to care.
they just genuinely do not care.
They genuinely do not care. If you praise their work, they process it as information. If you criticize them, they aren't wounded. They just process it as neutral data.
Wow.
It is a completely different internal operating system, one devoid of the social emotional volatility most people navigate daily.
Imagine the immense amount of energy most of us spend every single day managing our social image.
It's exhausting for most of us.
Worrying if we said the wrong thing in a meeting, wondering if our friends are secretly mad at us, trying to dress a certain way to signal our status,
Yeah,
to just have that entire mental background noise silenced entirely. Well, it sounds almost peaceful, to be honest,
it really does.
but it also sounds isolating to the outside observer. Which kind of brings me to a big point of confusion I
Yeah.
think people have. Let's assume people listening already understand that social anxiety is fundamentally about a fear of negative evaluation.
Mm.
What I find fascinating is the contrast and the actual baseline desire for connection when we compare social anxiety to SCPD.
The clinical distinctions there are vast and really important for you, the listener, to understand, especially if you are trying to make sense of a loved one's behavior.
Because they look similar on the outside, right?
Exactly. But social anxiety is an active state of suffering caused by a thwarted desire. The socially anxious person is sitting alone in their room on a Friday night, and they are in acute distress.
They want to be out.
Right. They are wishing they were at the party, they're wishing they had a partner, but the physiological terror of being judged keeps them paralyzed. The desire for connection is high, but the fear barrier is even higher.
But with SCPD, the wish for closeness is simply quiet to begin with.
Exactly.
The barrier isn't fear. They are sitting in their room on a Friday night and they're perfectly content.
They aren't wishing they were at the party at all.
They are just reading a book and enjoying the silence. The interpersonal drive is just absent.
And that absence of drive completely changes how a mental health professional needs to approach the individual.
I also want to look at how this compares to autism spectrum disorder. Because superficially, both might present with flat affect or, social withdrawal.
That's a really common comparison.
But the underlying mechanism has to be different. I imagine with autism, there might be sensory processing factors or difficulties reading neurotypical social cues.
Yes, that's a big part of it.
Whereas someone with SCPD reads the social cue perfectly well, understands exactly what is expected of them, and just opts out of participating.
You've hit on the core differential diagnosis right there. Autism is a neurodevelopmental condition. It often involves differences in sensory processing, repetitive behaviors, and challenges with social communication cues, what we sometimes call the mechanics of social interaction.
Yeah, the mechanics.
Yeah. But someone with SCPD usually has an entirely intact theory of mind and perfect social cognition.
Wait, really?
Yes. They know exactly how a conversation is supposed to go. They read the emotional subtext of the room accurately. They simply possess zero motivational drive to engage with it.
So the machinery works, the engine is just turned off.
Exactly. The machinery works, the engine is just off.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. If they don't have the desire for connection, and they aren't actively hurting anyone, I have to push back a little bit on the whole clinical model here.
Go for it.
If someone with social anxiety is suffering because they want friends but can't make them, that is clearly painful. We step in to help them.
Right, we treat the distress.
But if someone with XCPD genuinely doesn't care about connection and they are sitting at home perfectly content, why are we classifying this as a disorder at all?
This raises an important question, and it cuts to the very heart of modern psychological ethics and how coping and healing counseling operates.
Because disorder is a heavy word.
It is. The term disorder historically implies that something is causing significant distress or impairment in a person's daily functioning. For a long time, the psychiatric field looked at anyone who completely rejected the social norm and assumed they were broken. The baseline assumption was always that the loudest, most connected, highly social life was the only healthy way to exist.
The extrovert bias. The assumption that a solitary life is inherently tragic.
Exactly. The internal landscape of SCPD forces us to reconsider that bias entirely.
Makes sense.
If the person is able to hold down a job, often a solitary one, like data entry, night security, or remote software development, and they are fulfilling their basic life needs, and they are not personally distressed by their isolation.
And that's their problem.
Right. The field is beginning to recognize that this isn't necessarily something to cure.
That shift leads us directly into coping and healing counseling's core philosophy. Looking at their notes on treatment, their explicit stance is that many people with these traits are perfectly content living a solitary, low-key life.
Yeah.
And they state clearly that there is nothing wrong with that.
It is a profound statement for a mental health clinic to make. They are explicitly refusing to pathologize a peaceful, independent temperament.
Imagine the sheer relief that must bring to a patient.
Oh, it has to be life-changing.
I mean, someone might walk through the world for 30 or 40 years, constantly having parents, teachers, and coworkers telling them they need to come out of their shell
Oh.
or asking why they are so antisocial.
Always feeling like a project to be fixed.
Exactly. They internalize this idea that they are fundamentally broken. Then they finally speak to a therapist, and the first response is validation. They are told that if they like being alone, that is a perfectly acceptable way to live.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you can see a massive paradigm shift in mental health care. Historically, therapy was often used as a tool to mold individuals back into societal expectations.
Right, to make them normal.
If you didn't fit the socially acceptable mold, the therapy was designed to hammer you into it until you did. What CHC is doing is aligning with a much more modern, client-centered approach. Therapy is never about pushing someone toward a highly social life they do not want.
So if the goal isn't to make them social, I assume the therapy shifts entirely to logistics, like
Yeah.
how do I survive a workplace that demands networking, rather than how do I make a best friend?
That is exactly the first reason someone with SCPD might seek therapy.
Really?
Yeah.
Just the practical stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes an individual realizes that while they don't crave deep emotional intimacy, they do need basic functional relationships to survive in their career or manage their living situation.
You still have to pay rent. You still have to talk to your boss.
Precisely. A therapist will work with them on building pragmatic social skills. This might look like cognitive scripting, literally planning out the necessary dialogue for a workplace interaction.
Almost like running lines for a play.
Exactly like that. Or role-playing, how to navigate transactional conversations. The goal is to help them function in a highly social society without demanding they change their underlying personality or forcing them to feign emotional reciprocity.
The source also outlines a second reason they might seek care, which is dealing with co-occurring issues.
Mm.
Because, well, just because you like being alone doesn't mean you are immune to the rest of the human experience.
Right. Life still happens.
You can still experience a major depressive episode. You can still have generalized anxiety about finances, health, or the state of the world.
Absolutely.
And they might want support for those specific issues. A formal diagnosis is always made by a licensed clinician, which is necessary to untangle what is the baseline SCPD temperament, what is depression, and what might be anxiety.
And untangling those threads is delicate work. And this is where the logistics of seeking care become a massive barrier.
How so?
Because the traditional clinic environment is so hostile to this condition, the physical environment itself becomes a deterrent to getting help for those co-occurring issues.
Oh, I see what you mean.
Think about the traditional medical model. You have to call a receptionist, drive across town, sit in a crowded waiting room with strangers, and navigate small talk just to get into the therapist's chair.
Right. For someone with SCPD, going to a traditional waiting room feels like requiring someone to fill out a 50-page tax return just to get a $2 refund.
That is a great way to put it.
The reward matrix simply doesn't justify the immense administrative and interpersonal effort. The friction of the process outweighs the perceived benefit of the therapy.
And that structural friction is precisely why so many individuals with this temperament remain marginalized by the healthcare system. The very design of the clinic keeps them away.
It's built for extroverts.
Right. Therefore, building a delivery system that removes that friction isn't just a convenience, it is a necessary clinical intervention.
Because the traditional clinic environment is so hostile to this condition, the only way to actually deliver care is to completely remove the physical environment. That is why CHC built a 100% telehealth IPA compliant model. They cover all 159 counties in Georgia. So whether a patient is in an apartment in downtown Atlanta or a deeply solitary cabin in the Appalachian foothills, they have seamless access.
Which is huge.
And they have built a genuinely robust infrastructure. They maintain a diverse, culturally competent team of over 15 licensed therapists.
Yes.
The source lists LCSWs, LPCs, and LMFTs. To me, having that alphabet soup of credentials means they have a whole range of specialists with different lenses for viewing a patient's world.
That's spot on. The diversity in clinical licensure dictates the framework the therapist uses.
Okay, break that down for us.
Sure. So licensed clinical social workers, or LCSWs, are typically trained to view the patient within larger societal and environmental systems.
Okay.
Then you have licensed professional counselors, LPCs, who often focus heavily on individual cognition and behavioral patterns.
Right, the internal stuff.
And licensed marriage and family therapists, LMFTs, specialize in relational dynamics. Because even for an individual with SCPD who prefers solitude, they still exist within a family system or a societal framework.
So they might still have a mom or a brother they have to deal with.
Exactly. An LMFT, for example, might be crucial in helping an SCPD patient navigate boundaries with a sibling who simply doesn't understand their need for extreme distance.
That makes total sense. And they also offer a wide spectrum of services: individual therapy, couples and family therapy, teen therapy for ages 13 and up, plus life coaching. So the entire family ecosystem can find support.
It's very comprehensive.
But the logistical access only matters if the financial access is there. When your drive to engage is clinically low, a $100 copay isn't just a financial burden, it's an absolute behavioral roadblock.
It's the ultimate excuse to just not go.
Right. By aggressively lowering those costs, CHC is removing the final friction point.
Financial accessibility is a cornerstone of trauma-informed and patient-centered care. What did the numbers actually look like for CHC?
Well, the source lays them out clearly, and they are highly accessible. For anyone on Medicaid, there is a $0 copay.
Wow.
Yeah. By getting Medicaid copays down to zero, CHC is removing the friction that historically keeps this specific population marginalized. For other major insurances, they list Aetna, Cigna, Blue Cross Blue Shield, United Healthcare, and Humana. The cost is generally between $10 and $40 per session.
That is incredibly reasonable.
So someone with SCPD can sit in their own home, in their safe, quiet, controlled environment, open a laptop, and receive direct, boundary-respecting support without draining their bank account.
Lowering the financial barrier to that degree and combining it with the remote access means CHC is essentially building a bridge directly to people who would otherwise never seek help.
Yeah.
When your baseline motivation to interact is low, every single obstacle is a reason to quit the process. Removing those obstacles is a profound act of clinical care.
It really is.
They understand that the goal isn't to force a square peg into a round hole. The goal is to make sure the square peg is as comfortable, supported, and healthy as it can possibly be, entirely on its own terms.
If you are listening to this and realizing this telehealth model is exactly what you need, or maybe exactly what a highly solitary family member needs to address their anxiety or depression, you can reach out directly.
Definitely.
The contact info provided in the source is a phone number, 404-832-0102. You can also visit their website at shyness or email them at support@shyness. Finding a clinic that explicitly refuses to pathologize your baseline personality is incredibly rare.
It invites us all to stop assuming that everyone else's internal world operates with the exact same cravings and fears that ours does. The extrovert bias blinds us to the reality that a quiet life is not inherently a broken life. So true. Let's briefly recap the territory we've covered today. We started by defining the true, deep detachment of schizoid personality disorder. We explored the mechanics behind that emotional flatness and how the interpersonal reward circuitry is essentially powered down, resulting in a genuine indifference to praise and criticism.
Right, the zero social appetite.
Exactly. We drew a hard line between SCPD and the fear-based reality of social anxiety, as well as the neurodevelopmental factors of autism. We unpacked the ethical shift in modern therapy, the vital importance of not treating a peaceful, solitary temperament as a disease.
A massive shift.
And finally, we saw how coping and healing counseling's 100% telehealth model, with its diverse team and $0 Medicaid copays, provides the exact kind of boundary-respecting, low-friction support that someone with this temperament actually requires to thrive.
Before we wrap up, I want to leave you, the listener, with one final thought experiment to mull over based on the psychology we've unpacked today.
Okay, let's hear it. We talked earlier about how people with SCPD are genuinely indifferent to both praise and criticism. I want you to think about how much of our society, our economy, our social media architecture, and our own daily motivation is built entirely on the foundation of seeking approval and avoiding rejection.
I mean, almost every major decision we make has some thread of social consequence woven into it.
Exactly. So ask yourself this. What would your life look like, and what specific choices would you make today if you woke up completely immune to the opinions of everyone around you?
Wow.
If that feedback loop was simply silenced, who would you actually be?
If the interpersonal reward circuitry was just turned off, oh, actually, scratch that. I said no ellipses. Let me restart. If the interpersonal reward circuitry was just turned off, that is a completely different way to experience the world.
It really is.
We will let you sit with that one. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us today.